welcome to Phillips Mill Art Talk. I'm your host, Laura Womack, and with me is our producer, Jen McHugh.
Hello, everyone.
Today, we're talking with John Schmidtberger, who's won the Patrons Award for painting at Phillips Mill 2 years in a row now. John is a deeply thoughtful painter who nevertheless works very rapidly and exclusively on plein air. His longer sessions are 2 to 3 hours only. We'll talk with John about his process and his preference for decluttered paintings. John earned a BFA and an MFA from the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied painting, sculpture, and printmaking. We'll also talk with him about his gallery in Frenchtown, where he represents mostly mid-career artists and later. We're very pleased to welcome you, John Schmidtberger, to Phillips Mill Art Talk.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's start, John, with a look at a few of your paintings, starting with Arctic Plunge, which won the Patrons Painting Award at Phillips Mill this year. I had great feedback on this painting from so many different quarters, and in fact, we've already had some compliments on it in the chat. Tell us about this painting from your perspective, and we'll be looking at that in just a moment.
Okay. And this is Arctic Plunge we're talking about?
That's right.
Right.
There we go.
Right. Yeah, that painting is 3 feet by 3 feet. And it actually wasn't painted outside. It was painted in the studio because I was recovering from an injury, which I sustained in painting the study for this painting, which was 12 inches by 12 inches. And it was so cold while I was painting and I was scrunched up that I actually injured myself, and my arm and my index finger and thumb went numb. And I ended up having to go to physical therapy for a couple of months, and it all worked out well. But during that time, I couldn't do anything small or fine, but I could do things where I was reaching out at arm's length. So this is one of the paintings I did during that injury recovery.
It's fabulous. You want to talk about the painting itself? Where are we? We're looking obviously at the Delaware River.
Sure. One of the things that happens when it gets unbelievably cold is the sky gets a just much deeper blue than it normally is. And there's just tremendous brilliance and tremendous contrast. And it's, you know, it's terrible, very uncomfortable conditions, you know, to be out in, but the trade-off is it's just, it's like a nice winter steam, you know, on steroids or something.
That's right.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was thinking when we were talking about your working exclusively on plein air, that you'd have to work fast to do something in this kind of weather with the ice chunks on the river. I think your work here on the river itself is so beautiful, just all those colors that worked in. And you're known for your sense of color, aren't you, John?
I am. And I think I sort of trace that back to, I don't know, sometime gradually over like the last 5 to 10 years, somewhere in there, I eliminated a lot of black and umber and, you know, dark brown and sienna, a lot of these traditional colors, and switched over to pure, you know, purer versions. Like I very seldom use black, and I'll only use it as a color, like out of the tube. But like if I wanted to mix a dark, I'd probably use something like indigo blue.
Right, very good.
Yeah.
And Jen has anticipated me here in the chat. I meant to invite you all to ask questions of John in the Q&A. So if you have any questions for John as we go along, we will work those questions in throughout the talk. Just type into the question and answer. Okay, let's look at your painting that won the 2019 Patrons Award for painting. That is Green Ravine. John, were you surprised to win 2 years in a row? Any reaction to that?
Yes, I was very pleasantly surprised and honored. Because I think the very first time I applied was 1988, and I won an honorary mention, and I sold the painting, and I thought to myself, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. And then it was, you know, it was actually quite a while after that before I was accepted again. So
it's very fickle, as all of the local artists know. We have different judges each year, and we never know.
Yeah, I figured that out after a while.
Yeah, exactly. But congratulations for 2. Let's talk about your Green Ravine painting. This is lovely.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think this one probably more than anything shows that I studied with Neil Welliver. I mean, anyone that knows his work would probably, although, I mean, to me, it looks very different, but there's certain things in there that are, you know, that are unmistakably Welliverian. Is that a way to
sure.
put it? Yeah. And the other day we were talking about flatness, and like this is a good example of a painting that it has dimension, because that bright, really vivid green in the background is pulling you back there. But overall, it's a very flat design. So there's a tension between the flatness of it and the depth.
I love that you said that, John, because I was going to mention that this subject matter actually is often very flat as well, and yet you've achieved quite a bit of depth to it, and you have even some elevation through it. So I love that you said that, and I also can see the Welliver influence in this. That's nice. So why are you attracted to flatness? That seems unusual, because so many painters are striving for dimensionality. I mean, that's kind of the illusion of painting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But you know, it's prominent in some artists that I really like, that had a big influence on me. And one in that category is Fairfield Porter, American painter. And he often, you know, he worked at big scale and often like sort of broad, you know, washed areas without any detail. And they, you know, in an environment, there was definitely a flatness, you know, to them, you know, flat in the unadorned sense, but they were full of dimension. But there was oftentimes that beautiful tension in between those two states of depth. And he also was very, I really liked his sense of color. His wasn't as vivid as mine, but.
Very nice. Jen, I'm going to skip ahead. I know you've organized a lovely slideshow for us, but I'm going to skip out of order because I'd like to look at that luscious painting that is behind John now. We have a photograph of it, Sycamore Plein Air, and I'd love to talk about that. And also it gives us an opportunity to bring up Sue Ann's question. Yeah, please go ahead, John.
No, go ahead. You had a question?
We do. We have a question from the chat. Sue Ann wants to know about the blues that you use in your painting. Which ones do you use?
Sure. I think I use 1, 2, 3, three basic ones. But the go-to sky blue is cobalt. cobalt is, you know, just thinned out of the tube is a wonderful, wonderful sky blue. But all the way through to manganese, which is much greener and much more transparent. Ultramarine, I don't often use in skies. And yeah, oh, and indigo, which is a black replacement, but it's so dark that it really almost looks like black.
So talk to us about this painting, John. Is this one of your more recent paintings?
Yes, I think this was last winter, just before lockdown. And this particular tree is only about 75 yards from my house. So I don't know, I had done those paintings while I was recovering from the injury, and they were 3 feet by 3 feet. And I don't know, just in an impulse, I just ordered a 4 foot by 4 foot stretcher and made this huge canvas. And my plan was to just carry it out there, set it up, work on it, and carry it back. So I did that five times, maybe 6. But each session was, you know, only, you know, an hour to 2 hours tops. And it was so large that I needed to use nylon cording and tent stakes, which I attached to the canvas, and I hammered those into the ground to, you know, because even a slight breeze would carry the whole thing away.
Right.
So, yeah, there we are.
Here we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I've painted from this tree many, many times, you know, from all different angles and all that. So, and it's enormous. It's one of the biggest ones I've ever seen.
Oh, I think it's such a great painting for this area because it's, you know, it's sort of a modern take on the traditional style. And I love the fact that it's a detail about something that is very, you know, Delaware River Valley.
Right. Yeah.
You've got some interesting colors in here, John. I think the shadows on the tree are amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Can you talk here about some of the colors that you're using? And here, are you using black or maybe you're using the indigo?
There's very, very little black in this at all. Yeah, so a lot of the shadows were, yeah, blended colors and done in multiple passes, like something was put down first and then another color was put over it or not, you know, to create, you know, variety in the shadows. Some of them are like very blue, some are green, some are like real sienna reddish. But people ask me about, you know, exaggeration. And I guess, you know, I'm emphasizing the color, but I'm really responding to something that's there. But, you know, maybe, I mean, objectively, when I look at a photograph of something I'm working from, and then I look at my paintings, wow, yeah, that color is really exaggerated. But I think, you know, from focusing in on it, it's like, that's kind of what it looks like to me.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yes,
yeah.
And that's why we have artists, because of that interpretation, I think.
Right.
Jen, we've got the comment from Jennifer and then a question from William.
Yes, Jennifer said she has one of your many paintings of this tree, a favorite.
No, I know who this is.
And then Bill asked, was the decision to drop darker colors a conscious decision?
Oh, to drop darker colors?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, definitely. Although, you know, it evolved slowly. You know, there were, you know, like with a lot of processes, I can find a painting that I did 15 years ago that really just is made from a combination of just pure colors. and doesn't have any black or brown in it. But there might have been a whole long period after that where there were, you know, where the styles went back and forth. I mean, even, you know, to this day, there's, you know, sometimes I go out and I paint and it looks more realistic, and sometimes it looks more poetic.
Let's look at a couple more of your paintings. We've got, you actually do some architectural paintings as well. Let's look at that and see your range.
Sure.
What have you got for us, Jen?
We have Blue Chimney.
Oh.
Yeah.
Also in Phillips Mill.
Yeah.
Tell us about this. You've got a really wide, you've got the whole range of values in this, John, and it's, again, with the color.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's a generous proportion. I think it's like 24 by 24. So when you look at it, you can sort of feel like I had a lot of room to play around. Like I didn't have to just pay attention to the house, you know, and the street. You know, I could sort of put more in it comfortably.
Do you mostly work on a very large scale then? Is that what you're working?
No, I mean, I ran, you know, everywhere from tiny, you know, I call them baby paintings. They're like 4 by 4 inches up to these, you know, the giant sycamore. But lately I've been sort of between like 8 by 8 inches to 20 by 20 with occasional, you know, bigger efforts. Like during the lockdown, I did I did a triptych that was 3 panels, and each one was 30 by 36. So that was a nice, you know, big scale. I actually really prefer to work big. But there's a lot of downsides. There you go. That's 3 panels. Each one is 3 feet high.
That's not, or do you sell them as a unit or?
Yes, yeah, this one is, it's actually, they were all painted different times and in different places in the same ravine.
Oh, that's smart.
I hung them up to look at them.
You can see the break, but it almost looks as if it's one continuous scene.
Right, right. The one on the left was started in winter, and spring was just happening when the one on the right. So it was in that range. I hadn't worked, you know, big in a while outside, and oh, it just felt great. Because the thing about that is that the scale lets you use your gesture, use your body to, it's very physically hard to describe things with little tight motions when you can really, you know, you're painting a tree, you're like, oh, there's the tree, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Jim, we have a question from Jim.
Okay.
Jim wants to know, can you speak about warm and cool light sources and how you would change highlights and shadows and reflected light? And your work is beautiful.
Oh. Can you read the first part of that again?
Sure. He wants to know about warm and cool light sources and how you would change highlights and shadows.
Okay. Yeah, that's a little more of a technical painting question, I think.
And you can pass, John, as you like. I was going to ask you about your light because you have, you know, I'm really struck by, as a Californian, you have this very sunshiny perspective. Even in your triptych, in the woods, you have so much sun coming in. It feels to me.
Brilliance. Yeah, brilliance. And, you know, there's a huge range, and an approach that artists have. They're artists, plein air artists who only will paint outside when it's, I don't want to say murky, but just flat, like a cloudy day. Artists love that. And, you know, for certain, but for me, it's that just very contrasty, extreme, brilliant, you know, kind of thing. It's really a foundation. And we were talking about, you know, the way that I learned to paint was, you know, first in black and white, doing black ink on white paper monoprints. And the simple way of creating light by surrounding things with dark, you know, I learned that first. So if you look carefully, you'll see some kind of value, strong, you know, light contrast in there.
Right.
Because that's
with Hitoshi Nakazato in printmaking.
Yes. With print, yes. And we were really, really lucky at Penn because we had 24-hour-a-day access to these printmaking studios. So it was
fabulous.
Yeah.
Really nice. So that's interesting that do you only go out on sunny days? Because I think of that, you know, that murky day, the soft shadows is something that photographers like very much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't rule it out. I mean, I definitely painted in, you know, in snowstorms and mist, and I love fog, particularly love fog. But yeah, if I have a choice in the matter, it's always, you know, sun real super early, super late, blazing, crazy contrast, just knock your socks off, kind of. Because people, you know, you're driving home from work, you look out the window and it's, you know, everyone sees it.
Right.
But I'm out there like hunting it like a.
Well, I want to talk about that because you have talked about because you do work almost, I'm going to say now almost exclusively on plein air. You've talked about how you choose your scene. You're very selective, and sometimes you go out without even choosing, and passing on the opportunity to paint. Tell me what you're looking for. Tell us what you're looking for.
Well, I described it as an aha moment, like what's that painting? Like where there was always the guy who was knocked off his horse on his way to Damascus. There are all these paintings, Renaissance paintings of, I forget the Bible story.
Right. I'm really bad with names. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the aha moment, yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be something you haven't ever seen before. It's just the way that it is at that moment really grabs you. And you do have to be willing to spend a lot of time walking around with your plein air painting equipment and not coming home with anything. Because I learned really quickly that if I didn't have that feeling, the paintings weren't any good. And then you're coming home with a painting that you hate. You didn't have a good time, you know, doing it. You were just sort of going through the motions. So I learned that, you know, that was, you know, I needed to be after it like that in order to, you know, to make it work for me. You know, there's plenty of other people that, you know, all they want is for things to be the same, you know, and predictable or whatever, consistent at least. But there's something about that, you know, the plein air experience that's, you know, something, almost always something happens.
Right. No. Scott very kindly, I think he's a friend of yours, Scott Sheldon, says it's Paul is the apostle on the road to Damascus.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for that, Scott.
That's right. And I was thinking of Caravaggio.
Okay.
Yeah, there's this unbelievable, the light of like, you know, an epiphany.
Right.
I see the way. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
Very good. Yeah. So maybe that's why the light is so important as well, because it has that sort of kind of feeling to
Yeah.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Jen, I think Jill has a question that can take us in one of two directions as we go forward exploring John's work.
Sure. Jill wanted to know, have you done other figure paintings besides your main bather paintings? She loves your self-portrait.
Oh, I think very few, and I think, you know, most of them I still have. You know, and one or two, you know, portraits of dear friends. But, you know, I'm not really a portrait painter, but someone did use a painting for a book jacket.
Okay.
I like the portrait well enough. But, you know, I always did a ton of figure studies. You know, when I studied, you know, I was one of those people that just, you know, just did that religiously. But I never really wanted to get involved with it, like especially commercially, because people are so fickle about their appearances.
Right.
But I like doing them for fun.
So this self-portrait looks like a different painter, different man. But it is fabulous. Jill is correct about that.
And it's interesting.
Yeah, tell us about it. Yeah.
It's funny because I only had one suit, you know, at the time. And I guess this is when I was a bachelor's student, a BFA student, and I was working on it in the middle of the night, you know, in the art studio. There's not a soul around. And my future teacher, Neil Welliver, apparently had this habit of going and looking at the studios the night after he arrived, the night before, so that he would be on top of it and would mention things to people before, you know, whatever. But anyway, he's snooping around the studio like 3 in the morning when I'm painting this thing. He scared the living daylights out of me. But he said it was good. It was coming along. But I was also nervous because I couldn't get paint on it. It's my only suit.
And so you were in the suit while you were painting this?
I had a mirror, yeah. Oh. I just painted it from it cracks me up. It really does.
So you have had a long journey since you painted this and since this was who you were. But we were talking about how your tastes have changed over time, John. And when you were a student, that you were not so into some of the greats like Titian or Picasso or Matisse. And now you feel differently about that. What do you think has changed in your perception? Why didn't you see it before? And what has changed in your perception?
Well, I think, you know, there's an evolution of, you know, when you're young and you're a student, you're grappling, you know, with the very mechanics of how painting works or sculpture, whatever you're doing. And you're so impressed by that the content of it doesn't seem to matter. You're just in love with representation, you know, of it, because that's the real trick, you know, of paintings. And I think it's just, it takes a person time to mature in order to see something more than just say, you know, skill, for example. Because if you take 10 very skilled painters of any rank, there's, you know, going to be someone who really, you know, pops out there for some some reason or another.
Right. I mean, I look at the paintings that are behind you right now, your self-portrait and your picture of the sycamore and how much they've changed. And I mean, you can, it's sort of classical evolution of an artist. I mean, if you think about, like, for example, Picasso's early days in Paris, where he painted everybody else's style and, you know, was able to do a Toulouse-Lautrec that looked like Toulouse-Lautrec had done it.
Right.
Yet as you find yourself, you never know where your journey is going to take you. And now we're at this very, very different sycamore in your journey, John.
Right, right. I mean, I would argue if you zoom in really closely on, you know, one of these areas here, you'll see, you know, some tricks that I'm still using here, but that you really only see, you know, up close. But I hear what you're saying. That painting for me, it's such a bizarre hybrid because there's like, it's like a little Velasquez, and then there's a lot of Neil Walliver, my teacher, with these sort of blobby. Can I point to something?
Yeah, sure. And I'm wondering, which one do you want to look at? Maybe I'd love to see if we could look at those, Jen. I know you've got them separated. We don't have them on the same screen, but which one do you want to pull up, John? I think we'd all like to.
Yeah, pull up the self-portrait if you can.
Oops. Sorry, it was the wrong thing. I don't think you all wanted to see that.
Yeah.
Here you go.
There we go. You know, because it's got that very traditional, you know, Renaissance almost kind of looking, but it's also got this real contemporary feel at the same time. And, you know, the way that the jeans are painted or the shoes or anything is, if you look closely, it's like 100% Neil Walliver. It's the way he would paint, because that's what I was looking at the most at that time.
Right, exactly.
But it's, yeah, it just cracks me up. Someone at the time offered to buy this from me for like, I don't know, some money that I could have really used. And for some reason, I didn't sell it. But it just cracks me up.
Well, this one's very personal. I can see holding on to it. Yeah. Right. I think Richard McIntyre has, is commenting on your self-portrait, Jen.
Yep, he said that John painted a wonderful portrait of him that was sort of an accident. And that was Fred talking.
Fred, yeah.
Okay. Fred, it's coming from Fred.
Actually used the portrait that I did of him in a book jacket.
All right, good. Jen, let's go back to some of John's paintings. I think we've got some of your main paintings, John. Let's take a look at those. We're keeping Jen hopping tonight.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
So while we're talking about, while Jen is pulling that up, here we go. All right, go ahead. Let's see, New Hampshire Road.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's, that definitely fits in that flat versus depth thing again, because if you take I like doing this trick, if you take your hand and cover the top half or a little more, the bottom is just completely flat, has no depth whatsoever. But the combination of that brilliance in the background and just that little bit of the swoop of the road is enough to fill it with dimension. So that's.
You said you're not interested in detail in your paintings, John.
Mm-hmm.
But here I'm seeing, in a way, I'm seeing a lot of detail. I just love how painters describe their work. You see things so differently. You don't see a lot of detail in this?
No, I mean, I see a lot of contrast, and I see a lot of, there's definitely nuance in it, but what I mean by detail is that very fine detail, like, you know, little tiny individual rocks or individual leaves,
Right.
that kind of thing. I prefer to do it this way because it requires the viewer to do a little bit in order to make it really come fully together. I mean, at a distance, I would say all of them really come together. They're convincing buildings, streams, people, whatever. But to me, they get real interesting as you get in closer, and they hover between, you know, obviously when you get right up on them, they're completely abstract. And then as you add distance back from them, they involve you, you know, in constructing the image. Requires a little bit from the viewer.
Right, and that effect is compounded by working on the very large scale. Is this painting smaller or larger?
This one is medium sized.
Okay.
But it was funny because I did it and I brought it back and I had planned to work on it some more the next day. I was like, oh, it's just a start. And then I was about, you know, went out to take it out to work on it again. I was like, oh no. Done.
There you go. All right, and let's see, Port Clyde. I think that's also in Maine.
Oh, yeah.
Love this color.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and there's that manganese blue that someone was asking about in this, kind of below the lobster boat. There's a band of almost, yes, right through there.
So beautiful.
And the sky is cobalt. So one's leaning red, one's leaning green.
Right.
Yeah.
You describe your style as poetic realism. What does that mean, John?
Well, it's the image is definitely realistic, but it is in the more poetic range as opposed to descriptive. Like I say, you know, if you can make a tree with one color and one brushstroke, that's the goal. If it takes, you know, 3, okay. If it takes, you know, 4 and 2 colors, okay, I guess so. But, you know, by reducing the number of elements, you actually put more pressure on those elements to be just right.
Right.
And I think that's something I always try to do that, but I think that's something that really came together well in this particular one. Very proud of that one.
It's lovely. Seems like your brushstrokes. We have an observation that your brushstrokes in this water, in the water, are different from the brushstrokes in some of your other work. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean they're very rapid. You can see that I'm just moving it from one place to another. In some cases, squishing it into the paint that's already there. But we talked a little bit about rhythm, right? And that's something that is very important to me. And, you know, a lot of these phenomena, like we were talking about, wind blowing down, making big dark marks on a bay or a river, they always have this rhythm, you know, to them. And it's very particular to that exact moment. But I'd say that's one of the places where, like, actually trying to explain what's going on in my mind when I'm painting a stretch like that, it's almost a little I don't know, makes my head explode. But
I think that's what, you know, what I'm seeing in your work, going from, you know, looking at your self-portrait from your college days to what you're doing now. It's, you know, I think part of the process of becoming a mature artist is internalizing, you know, those lessons that you've learned from all of that time. You can't get to something like this without having put a lot of time in, you know, whether it's in the university or the years after, however you're getting there.
right.
You're not going to make that transition without time.
Yes. And it's so, you know, the pace of it is so slow. But you know, for example, you know, one of the artists that I represent in my gallery passed away last year at the age of 98. And he was an artist his whole life. And I figured, you know, if I have the same life arc, I need to keep developing and not doing just the same thing for another 30 years. And that's, you know, God only knows where I'll be, you know, then. It's, you know, that's a great thing about a visual artist's career, because there's so many careers that are much more bound by, you know, your physical ability or just brief. And you know, there are artists that really didn't develop much, but anyone who's really sincere, you know, and sticks at it for a long time, you know, good things happen. You know, great evolutions and changes happen. You know, I don't know if I'd wake up tomorrow and I'd say I'm going to, you know, become a printmaker. I don't think I would do that, or, you know, a filmmaker or something. But you gotta always hope that you're going somewhere with this.
So do you feel the change over time, or does it happen to you?
I think it happens to you. Sometimes you're aware because, like I said, you see it, you know, something pops out that's kind of not quite like everything else that's going on. And then when you look, you know, 20 years later, you look over, you know, because I have photos of most of the things that I've done in batches from years. And if you just go up and down, you know, the list, you will see these outliers that were prefigured. And I just find that fascinating. Yeah. Where did that, you know, was that totally a mistake? Was I in a hurry? You know, what happened?
And do those things, they're outliers, do you ever go back and visit those again? And
oh yeah, definitely. Yes.
And do they turn into something? Is that how that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
Like an evolutionary process.
Yeah. Right. And but it's so crazy how it requires that that arc of time to see, you know, the values, and that is a very valuable lesson I learned, because probably 90% of everything I ever did would be in a trash can right now if I had, you know, if I had my way, you know, when I was being super judgmental, which you need to be a good artist, but you can't, not to the extent that you can't move forward. You can't be like reasonably pleased.
So you keep those. Do you keep all the things that you feel like a mistake and later you find them valuable? Is that, did I hear that correctly?
No. I mean, because my wife and I are both artists, at this point we're trying to get rid of as many paintings as possible. But there are a few, you know, certain ones, especially ones with my kids, and you know, that I wouldn't sell, but
right. No. Yeah. Jen, I think we have some near and dear questioners. What have we got in the Q&A?
Yes, it's funny that you mentioned your kids, because they both asked some very good questions. Let's listen. First, your daughter, Rebecca. She said, I know you go through phases of being obsessed with certain artists. Whose work are you obsessed with at the moment? Is that artist inspiring your work right now? And she says she knows you're biased, but your art is amazing. And thanks for the artsy jeans.
You're very welcome. I'm not sure you had a choice in the matter with all the art that was lying around while you were growing up.
Are you obsessed with any particular artist right now? And who have you been obsessed with in the past?
Well, I just very fortunately got to go to the Philadelphia Museum of Art just very recently, and it only just reopened. But I had some business in Philadelphia, so I went down there and spent a couple hours in the museum. And there's a small Cezanne still life that I always look at it. I mean, whenever I go there. But, you know, I was looking at it and I made the guards nervous. You know, they came over.
Right.
I learned something. The actual policy is arm's length. So, you know, because I need to look at the texture and I'm trying to figure out like how these, you know, this painting has a lot of built up texture on it. So the closer you get, it just, and he obviously worked on it for a really long time, maybe years. And it's not much bigger than a cigar box lid. And yeah, very inspired by that. And I was really, really unhappy that, you know, during the pandemic that I haven't been able to go, you know, to either the museums in Boston or New York or Philadelphia. Because, you know, that's, you know, when I was young, I just wanted to look at realistic things. They could have been, you know, a hot rod poster. To me, like, was as great as, you know, a Cezanne, because I was just interested in that realism. But you learn as you go along.
Are you still interested in the hot rod poster, or are you gone over entirely to the Cezanne?
Yeah, I've moved much more into like, yeah, my appreciation of modernist, you know, borderline non-representational work. But she's absolutely right. I go through enormous, you know, art crushes, and it's sometimes on some of the artists that I'm showing in my gallery, they bring their artwork in, and I'm like so jealous. I'm like, oh, how do you do that? Whatever. So, but I think that's a wonderful thing, because any artist will tell you that everything came from somewhere else and was all stolen from someone else. So go to the museum and steal away. Don't feel bad about it.
I want to come back to I promised everybody we talk about being a gallerist and how that, you know, affects your work and your relationships. But real quickly, do you know the name of that Cezanne, or are we going to go, should we all go and hunt the Cezanne still lifes at Philadelphia Museum of Art?
Can I bring it up on my phone? Will that work?
Yeah, and also we can get that that information and include it on our Facebook page, maybe Jen or something. We can get that to you.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't have it right here.
And Jen's doing a search for the website right now.
Okay.
So being a gallerist, you talk about how, I mean, you represent artists in their mid-career or later. And you talk about how they bring in their paintings and you're jealous. Well, is there a reason why you only represent artists in their mid-career? You don't want to find the next, you know, star Bucks County or Lambert, Frenchtown painter?
Right. Well, I'd say like the youngest artists I have are about 40, which is very, in the art world terms, is very young. So, but I have, you know, one who passed away, and, you know, the rest of us are in, you know, 50s through 80s. I don't know. I actually was organizing a show for young artists right before the lockdown happened. That was one, because there was, you know, it's terrible, really, really terrible for young, you know, for young painters, visual artists to get, you know, to be able to show anywhere. And there were, you know, there were informal, you know, opportunities when I was in high school, college. I got to I got to have work in gallery, you know, and it's very important. I wish there were, you know, there were more opportunities.
Right.
But I do love, especially that late arc of artists' careers. You know, certain artists really went through some pretty amazing changes towards the end of their career. You know, very positive and interesting. And I'm just fascinated by anybody that is like actively working, you know, after their, you know, with whatever age, you know, advanced age. You know, but there's a lot of that, you know, that's what makes these people tick.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a vocation, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So do you find that being an artist helps you as a gallerist? Is it you understand the artist better? You're able to work with them?
Yeah, yes, I think so. Yeah, because I've been on, you know, both sides of that. One of the things that drove me to open the gallery was not being, you know, 100% happy, you know, with the situations, you know, that I was showing in. But I have to say, I came about it more or less by accident. I really kind of fell into it. But I'm very, very, very glad I did, because we were talking before about, you know, visual arts are, you know, particularly lonely. I mean, part of the reason I think I'm a plein air painter is I bump into people while I paint. It's a little, it's actually less lonely than studio work. But, you know, to be in touch with other artists that are doing that, you know, going through developing styles, you know, works, whatever, it's just super interesting to observe that, you know, and I'm just there and people are coming through the door, you know, with, you know, their work as it's evolving. It's really gratifying.
Right. And yet you still have to maintain your focus on what you're doing, right? We talked about how it's so tempting to say, so-and-so is doing this great thing.
Right.
But it can't be mine.
Yeah, it's like production by proxy, you know, kind of thing. But the other way that works is you see people coming in with all these paintings under their arm and you're like, oh, ooh, I bet I better get cracking, you know.
Great. You know, John, I think your work you clearly approach it from such a personal aspect. I mean, it really seems like your relationship with your work is very internal. And so we appreciate you sharing that with us.
Sure.
Aiden has a question along those lines for you. Jen?
Yes, Aiden wants you to tell us, what is it like to paint? What happens to your focus and thoughts?
Oh, you know, I was thinking about that today. That's a great question. You know, when I was talking about looking at the water in that Port Clyde painting, you know, and the rhythm of that, there's always a kind of initial sort of shaky period as I'm like kind of, you know, a few minutes of figuring out the basics of what I'm going to do, what's going to be in the picture, what's not. and then it's sort of like, you know, it's off to the races after that. But there is definitely a point that you enter that's very trance-like. You know, you might be maybe having a little bit of inner dialogue, like you might be saying like, you know, geez, I better hurry up and, you know, get those, finish blocking in that tree line on the top. I mean, while I'm having so much fun painting these bright, you know, parts over here, I got to remember, I got to do that. I might have something like that running in my head, but it's very, it's unbelievably involving and very, trance implies being out of it. It's like a very conscious trance. And I always know, like, when I've been there, because sometimes when I'm done, I can't talk. I mean, I have to reach back into the regular world, because there's no verbal part of it. And good question. That's what it's like, very intense.
I love to hear you talk about that. A friend of mine who's an artist, we talk about that trance state a lot. And John, is there a way that you find that you get into that state? Because I think that really is the creative state. It's like a hyper focus. And that the act of getting into that trance, that active trance, you know, for a lot of people, that itself can be challenging.
Yes. Yeah, I think a lot has to do with discipline, and that I liken it to like a golfer. When he's done playing, he takes, or she takes, you know, gets their clubs all clean, puts them all back in order. Everything's absolutely ready to go. And I approach the artwork the same way. Like you know, making canvases, and a lot of times I like to make them myself, and a lot of times the prep of that takes quite a lot of time, usually far outweighing the amount of time that I'm actually painting, you know, on the other aspects. I think that describes it.
I think we found some resonance there with the trance state. I think Anne has a question, Jen.
Yes, she said, when you are painting in the trance state, is it like flow, meaning you're totally immersed in the experience?
Yes, that's a really good metaphor, flow. Just dun dun dun, you know, dun, you know. I imagine it's the way like a really, really good cook feels when they're in the heat of like the kitchen. Just hyper focused, but you know, at the same time, just sort of flowing over, like, you know, like say not being thrown off by like your easel slips a little bit and your hand slides down and gets paint all over it. So, all right, this is going to take a minute and a half, and I'm going to have to put mineral spirits on my skin, and I hate doing that. When you're in that flow, you just, oh, okay, yeah, here we go. All right. That's the flow. And that's why it's for me, it's crucial to be like, to have that aha thing and the flow. And that is easier over time, because, you know, if you stick to your routine, you know, you always have your easel ready, your colors are all, you know, in the same, you're not putting them in different spots every time you go out to paint. You know, the basics of it are predictable. That helps. You know, when you're just trying to figure those things out.
I think that is really helpful, I think, John, because it's that prep, those repetitive motions where you know everything is, your brain doesn't have to engage with the minutia. It can go right to the creative act. Yeah, and the observing that gets you in. Yeah.
Yeah, less of a drag from the technical end of it.
That's a beautiful description. I think we're going to close it up there because I think it was so beautiful how you stated that. So I just want to let that sink in for everybody. And I appreciate so much John Schmidtberger, you joining us on Art Talk. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And thank you also to Jen McHugh, our producer, and offline, Dennis Riley. This is Phillips Mill Art Talk. We have coming up scheduled next week, or in 2 weeks, we have Pat Martin scheduled to join us. She's a Bucks County institution. I think everyone can agree to that. She's been making art here for nearly half a century, although she's originally from California. She's our first abstract artist on Art Talk, and she comes from a deeply intuitive place. So I think that also could be another very personal conversation. And yet academically, she's also an academically trained artist and very aware of the dictates of art principles. So I think it'll be interesting to talk with her about abstract art from that perspective. I hope you all will join us. Thank you all very much. This is Phillips Mill Art Talk, and I'm your host, Laura Womack. Good night.